It started.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the last session of APPS Summer Webinar Series hosted by Peregrine Global Services. Just in case you haven't joined our previous three sessions, let me briefly introduce what AAPP is about. This is a nonprofit organization with the primary purpose of to promote leadership and representation to advance the quality of business and management education in this Asia Pacific region. Our mission is to collaborate in research, teaching, and working in partnership to improve business school standard quality. We have about 139 members throughout the globe, not just within the Asia Pacific, but those who also want to learn business management education models in the Asia Pacific region, and those who want to collaborate with the schools within the region are also members. And if you want to learn more about us, please visit our webpage www.appps.org, and we have three previous webinars, and those topics were career development soft skills and how do we assess the skill sets, and we just had the learning the strategy simulation for the onlines. And today is the last session, and it is for the assurance of learning outcomes. And without further ado, let me hand it over to today's speaker, Ms. Alima Jemiransuren, who is Director of Asia Pacific Operations at Peregrine Glover Services. Alima?
Great, Kayla, thank you so much. And I'd like to mention it's been a pleasure, and we really enjoy our collaboration with AAPBS. So welcome, everyone, to, as Kayla mentioned, our last session of this seminar, which we are offering to you in collaboration with AAPBS. So first of all, I'm really glad you are able to join us for this presentation, and I'm hoping that we'll be able to answer all your questions, burning questions related to assurance of learning and how to measure learning outcomes, how to use the data that you collect from your assessment processes. So I already got a couple questions, so I'm very excited about it. So let's get to it. A little bit about who we are as Peregrine Global Services. And as Kayla mentioned briefly, I am the Director of Asia Pacific and Asia Operations of Peregrine Global. And we are an organization committed to developing values-based leaders and impacting the quality of education around the world. So we offer higher education solutions related to learning assessment and online learning, higher education. We offer higher education consulting solutions, along with leadership and professional development workshops and seminars delivered to you in person, online, or using hybrid methods. So we do plan to conduct an interactive seminar as much as we can, and there are multiple ways for you to participate, right? So please respond to our poll questions when they are presented. Feel free to type in your questions in the chat box, and I already got a couple questions, as I mentioned, in the Q&A box. And if we don't get to your questions, feel free to email myself and Kayla, and we'll be more than happy to follow up with you, or perhaps even have a one-on-one session with you and your team members. As was mentioned in the announcement, I'd be happy to provide you with a free copy of our Assurance of Learning workbook, which a lot of our colleagues find it very helpful, not only for their work, but also for bringing their team members on board as far as assurance of learning is concerned, as far as assessment processes and planning is concerned. So here, let's delve into it, right? I do want to mention, and I'm sure you've noticed, I'm based in Tokyo, Japan. So we are in the same time zone, and would be, again, really thrilled to sit down with you virtually these days, but hopefully in person, and help your team to put together or discuss any challenges you might be having because you'll see that we have a wealth of experience with Peregrine, having more than 500 partner institutions utilizing many solutions that are related to quality assurance, to online assessment, to online course offerings, leveling, and so forth. All right, so let's start this presentation with one of my favorite quotes from Nelson Mandela, right? And we are all, I'm sure, have seen it here and there. So Mandela understood, of course, that changing the world, especially in a positive way, could be achieved through education. But more importantly, education that develops and encourages the use of critical thinking as at its cornerstone, right? And that'll help the world to minimize the risk of falling into ignorance. And as educators, I believe that we play a crucial role in improving the world we live in, right? And we do that by continually reflecting on and improving quality of education we offer to our students, and improving the educational experiences for our learners, who will at the end bring on positive changes in the world that we live in. So when we look at the title of the presentation, right, of this workshop, it really is about looking at what we are doing at our institutions to improve quality, and quality through the notion of learning outcomes. So how can we use learning outcomes as a tool to improve quality? And when we talk about assurance of learning, we are referring to how to demonstrate through assessment processes that students achieve learning expectations for the program in which they participate. I know I have a video going on, but I'll talk instead of the video talk over. So then the development, measurement, and analysis of learning outcomes is integral into providing quality business programs at all of our institutions. So then let's get to then why are learning outcomes important in higher education, right? And I'm sure you are all fully immersed in this topic because you are attending today's session. So just kind of in brief, we have made a promise to our students that when they complete business programs, they will have acquired certain knowledge, competencies, and skills which they can apply to their work environments, right? And then how do we know we are delivering on those promises to our students? And how do we ensure that we continue delivering on those promises? So the answer is by setting effective and measurable learning objectives, and of course, measuring them. Learning outcomes are important because they help us to measure what we expect students to know and be able to do once they've completed their studies, right? Also, they help to ensure that a process of continuous improvement is in place, not just a once in a while kind of event that has to be done at the end of the academic year to satisfy an accreditation standard. And also for all of our stakeholders, including students, our partners, businesses, and even parents, it is strategic and vital that schools remain transparent and accountable. So also, finally, learning outcomes, if done well, enable the schools to close the loop. I know I generally don't like to use these idiomatic phrases and expressions, but this one I'm sure you are all too familiar with and constantly shows up when talking about accreditation and learning outcomes. And there's a reason to it, right? There's a good reason to it. But simply put, it means that after a process of evaluation and analysis, changes are made to your academic programs to help improve any areas that are not meeting your stated learning outcomes. From there, the process begins again, and you are able to determine if the changes that were made a difference in the new results, right? Did the changes you make have intended impact is what you want to revisit and evaluate. Now, hence, traveling through a process from the beginning to the end and then continuing with it, that helps us to arrive at closing the loop. So measuring student learning objectives is not the end goal, right? Most importantly, we are constantly surveying, collecting data, and analyzing the student learning results to ensure that again, we are continuously improving our academic programs. So there's a great nexus, of course, between quality and accreditation. In addition to learning outcomes and goals and objectives being required by all major international accreditors, we are, of course, working to really offer the better experience and education to our learners. So we, as Peregrine, work with all the major international accrediting agencies for institutional and programmatic and national also accreditation as well. So almost all of the accreditors, as mentioned above, require you to have identified and defined learning objectives within the established framework of quality assurance processes. And some involve direct measurement and some involve indirect measurement of learning results. And then, especially with programmatic evaluation, there are some more expansive standards that incorporate social impact and so forth. So here's an example, a handful of organizations that we work with. So let's take a look at AACSB. Oh, yes. And what does AACSB say about learning outcomes, right? And especially with the newly reformulated standards of 2020, they specifically say it in Standard 5 that the assurance of learning processes have to include direct and indirect measures for ensuring the quality of all degree programs that are deemed in scope for accreditation purposes. And then all of the other programmatic or institutional or national accreditors have similar requirements, right? In case of IACB, there might be some of you who are going through IACB accreditation, then they have very well defined key learning outcomes. And those include critical thinking, teamwork, communication, and leadership, in addition to business knowledge areas. So there's also ACBSB, another partner of ours, and they have a whole standard devoted to student learning assessment. And in the case of ACBSB, they have direct, indirect measures, but also they require comparative measures of learning. So you need to compare your student learning relative to the averages of other aggregates. And here's an AMBA learning outcomes requirement, which includes both fundamental business knowledge in addition to workplace readiness, or what we call soft skills. So here, I know I have some questions coming in. I'll address them, and just wanted to check in. Oh, thank you, Kayla, for putting our email addresses in the chat box. So here's my first poll question. I want to find out if your institution has a continuous improvement process, right? Please do let us know if you have a process in place, or you might have some parts of it and need some improvement, or some of you might be in the process of creating one, which sometimes is the best situation where you can really put your framework together, put a really good assessment plan together, and sort of work it to make sure that your assessment meets your particular needs versus grandfathering some kind of process that is already in place at your institution, right? So I wanted to give good 75. Well, thank you so much. Answers are coming in, and I still see people are responding. The good news is more than half of you have responded that you do have a continuous improvement process in place, right? A process in place. Almost third of you say you have parts of it in place. And then 10% of you are in the process of creating. So I got, oh, thank you. I'll just end the polling and share the results. And then, there's a good 10% of you are in the process of creating a continuous improvement plan together. And then only 5% do not have any formal process, have more of a informal process. Well, thank you so much for responding to this poll. And so then how can schools meet these assurance of learning requirements, right? How do we measure retained student learning and ensure continuous improvement? and provide transparency and accountability, and at the end of the day, to close the loop, right? Which is what the Deming cycle for continuous improvement is. So there are many approaches to establishing this process, and the one that we utilize is the Deming and the PDCA cycle, which is a great place to start. You can see the circle or the loop, right? And I'm sure you're quite familiar with this tool, which has been used by business and industry in one form or another for decades to help improve quality. And so we have adopted it and we use it in higher education. So here's an example of the Deming cycle that's been adopted to higher education and continuous improvement of student learning. So I find it provides a very nice systematic way to review the importance of making the most out of learning outcomes assessment data for better decision making. And so let's take a look at the different steps, but I do want to focus more on the act, right? Make changes part of the cycle, or otherwise, as we've just mentioned, closing the loop. So one of the most important parts of this cycle is to establish clear learning outcomes on the program level, which are not to be confused with learning outcomes on the module level or course level, right? Individual course or module level. We need to determine what it is we want students to know and be able to do upon completion of your academic program, right? And then the programmatic learning outcomes, of course, tied to your institutional learning outcomes and also your mission and vision. One of the most sort of helpful tools that is employed in defining learning outcomes is called the Bloom's Taxonomy of learning, which I'm sure you are all very familiar with. And it provides us a list of action verbs based on each level of understanding and learning. So this list assists us in creating learning objectives that are descriptive, level appropriate, but most importantly, provides measurable and effective objectives. Now, often when I look at learning outcomes, and we work with many partner institutions in helping them to define, to create, and to hone their learning outcomes, I find them to be written in quite a vague way, right? Which makes them very hard to measure. So we cannot just simply say students will understand marketing, right? What does that mean to understand specifically? It's not quite appropriate to use understanding in creating learning objectives because it is too vague, right? And how do you measure it? So instead, if you use verbs such as students are able to summarize, make inferences, or are able to compare, different concepts, or interpret and apply and so forth, then you are formulating your learning outcomes in a much better light. So the left-hand side, of this list, may be okay for a general description for something that does not need to be measured, right? But it's really the right-hand side that helps us to create measurable learning outcomes. So the next stage is how to identify your objectives, benchmarks, and how you will put into place the assessments. These usually go together since the tools you use to assess will often dictate the objectives, benchmarks you will choose. So one thing I want to add again is, of course, when you identify and define your learning outcomes, always start from the mission and vision of start from the top, right, institution, go down to your college and school level, and then go down to your program level. All your learning outcomes should link back to your programmatic strategic learning goals, right? And the program goals are usually linked to the university, institution-wide goals, mission, and vision, so that the learning outcomes are written based on your programmatic goals. So half of the work should already be done when you sit down and start writing your learning outcomes, right? So what we know is that assessment tools used to measure learning outcomes need to be as best as possible, objective, comprehensive, and again, to have results that can be measured. Now, at this point in our continuous improvement cycle, we have identified our outcomes, identified our objectives, and considered a process. And now we move to the collection and analysis stage of the Deming cycle. So here's an example I want to share with you of a learning outcomes plan for an MBA program. So there are 6 areas I want to evaluate and want to come up with a written statement and a measurable objective for each and every one of them, right? And also we have the tools we use to measure each individual objective. There are many different tools that are used to measure learning outcomes. And here are just a couple I will share with you, and we'll address them later. But as you can see here, so I've sort of taken the AACSB requirements. So I'm covering both the fundamental skills and number 4, but have also set up objectives for some important soft skills I'd like to measure, right? It's important to keep in mind that we don't have to cover every single learning activity, and we can measure different learning objectives over time. So when I work with partner schools, I work quite often and use a plan very similar to this to guide the discussion. So here I wanted to launch another poll, and if you could answer, and here I wanted to find out, do you objectively measure learning outcomes, right? So the answer is yes, all your learning outcomes are objectively measured. The middle ground would be most of our learning outcomes are measured. Some are kind of out there, even though defined, but haven't selected any tools to actually measure them, which quite often happens. Or maybe you don't have any objective ways of measuring your learning outcomes. So far, the responses are coming in that, yeah, you do measure some of your learning outcomes objectively, some kind of fall to the wayside. At this point, I have 75% of the responses back. Okay, so 20% are saying, yep, all learning outcomes are good and measured objectively. And I have 75%, so let me end the polling and share the results. So good news is you're not in the 3rd category, majority of you. And so most of you, 3/4 are right in the middle. So there's always room for improvement. And then there's 20% of you are in a good shape. So that's very good news. But we can always improve, and we can always do better, right? So in my previous example, I listed a number of evaluation assessment tools that we can use to measure, right, in an objective way, your learning outcomes. So there are many different ways, of course, and the list I have here includes some of those most common ones, which is, end of program comprehensive assessment, 360-degree competency evaluation, senior thesis dissertation, embedded assessments and course modules, internship, apprenticeship reports, business simulation. So someone asked a question about if you are using embedded assessment, for example, right? Someone asked a question already before the session. So you have your outgoing students, seniors, you offer the assessment, right? You measure their learning level, they have responded or taken the assessment, good. And then you have incoming class in the fall, so you collect the inbound exam. So you have a pre and post situation going on, for example. And then the question was, your students have graduated, gone, and you cannot do anything with their data, or you cannot take remediation steps, right? But the value of it is when we conduct these assessments, we're looking at a sample, at a representative sample of your students, right? So even though your incoming student classes differ, but overall, your student population demographics stay the same, I imagine, right? So as an average, you can use the results from your outgoing class and then learn about the strengths and the areas of improvement in terms of the knowledge or business skills and competencies, and then make improvements so that the incoming students could benefit from it, right? And then statistically speaking, if you wanted to get direct measure of learning, you can compare the incoming class, say September 2022 students' results against September 21, let's just say, right? Fall students' results against the spring 21, which is the graduating class of this academic year, and then see how much improvement students have gained as a result of completing your academic program. So I hope this answers your question. And then when I come to the assessment, I can expand a little more on it. But I just wanted to hit it before I move on to the next areas of discussion. All right, so this brings us to the last two steps of the cycle: sharing results and making changes, or better known as closing the loop, right? That's where we want to spend most of our time. So our objective here is to take all of the work we have put into this process and then use the results to uncover our strengths and weaknesses and decide if we want to address them, if we want to make any changes. And of course, when you're working with data, you want to make sure that you have a good sample. Of course, you have established trend. What you're seeing is not just one, quirky, spiky sort of anomaly of a data. So, but once you have established those, and once you really dug into, identified, of course, the areas of weakness or potential improvement, and then once you have decided that's a priority, that is a focus of your program, then you want to really start discussing the making change part. So as you recall, the objective is to have data that enables the accreditation and quality assurance team that it serves to help understand to what degree students are meeting your learning outcomes, right? Here I have a simple bar graph from one of our reports that give a benchmark with 5 topics that are under evaluation. So in this case, we have business economics, entrepreneurship, human resource management, information systems, and logistics management. So we are comparing these results against of the outgoing students, it's outbound students data against each other, and also average, that is the neon green light there. So finally, after reviewing the results, it is best to determine if you should make any changes, right? And here's a quick table that gives some examples of what possible changes might take place after having reviewed, analyzed, and discussed the results. So, here you can note the first item is improve accounting results, right? And then the action required and timeline would be review accounting course with Professor Jones to identify enhancements, review with Professor Smith, study workshop exercises in accounting. You have a deadline. And then you also spell out what are the desired outcomes you want to achieve as a result of this change, right? So what you want to see is improve score to surpass 60%. Well, it could be anything, but within two years of implementing the changes. So you can see, you get a gist of what this action plan might look like. All right, so I'm going to go to the next session, but before that, getting into learning outcomes assessment solutions as a complementary resource for today's webinar participants as a token of our appreciation, I will email you link to our Assurance of Learning workbook. And if you wanted to receive a physical copy of the book, email me. I'll be happy to mail it to you, though mail is a little slow these days, because if you print it, it's a pretty hefty, nice, big, thick workbook. But I'd be happy to send you a digital copy of the workbook or a physical copy if you wanted to share it with your team members. Also, I wanted to mention, we do have an Assurance of Learning online course used in some of our assessment workshops. And the purpose of this course is to teach the concepts, principles, and requirements associated with the assurance of learning to higher education officials seeking especially initial or accreditation or reaffirmation of accreditation, right? And then the course also applies to quality assurance managers in higher education who want to learn more about AOL for continuous quality improvement. So if you wanted to receive a free access to this online course, please email me, respond to my communication, and I'd be happy to send you a code that provides you with free access. All right, so let me check the questions. Indirect measures. Oh, there was a question about indirect measures, and I'll address it now, actually. So, direct measure is we are observing, we are, evaluating students' knowledge directly, right? Students show us, answer questions, provide an event, and then, they can demonstrate their knowledge level. So that's direct measure of learning. Now, indirect measure of learning you can get through, exit survey, absolutely, surveys, knowledge-based surveys, and we do have a survey, a complimentary service you can attach to our assessment tool. I'll mention it when we come to it. And so absolutely, you can also ask, faculty to evaluate a student's particular knowledge. That would be indirect measure and so forth. So, thank you. I just want to make sure if there are any questions that we need to. So I hope that helps. And then when we come to assessment, we'll come to it in a little more detail. All right. So there are, as we've discussed, multiple ways to measure student learning outcomes. There are many solutions for you available to start and put together a really good assessment plan and assessment process, right? But we have some solutions that really help you to become more efficient, more effective, and most importantly, to bring you savings in terms of finances, resources, and efforts, right? Time is quite valuable, and your faculties and administrators' time is also valuable too. So one of the solutions that we already discussed is Value Skills. I think it was our second webinar, and this is an online 360-degree based evaluation of learners' soft skills. And we have a database of 200 soft skills with individual rubrics that come to evaluate those individual, workplace readiness, competencies, skills. So there is a really good objectivity built into the system. So if you wanted to learn more about it, please feel free to check the video recording of that second webinar. And then today, let's focus on, our global business education assessment tool to measure business knowledge learning competencies. All right, so we have been talking about defining learning outcomes, right? Putting together an assessment plan and process. And then the most important step in the Deming cycle of continuous improvement, as we've discussed, is to analyze the data, understand the data, and use the results for your continuous improvement work, right? So there's no need to spend time, effort, and resources if we do not use the information obtained from the assessment of the assessment results for decision making, making improvements to your curriculum, learning, and delivery of content and knowledge to your students, right? So it would be a waste of effort, waste of time, and waste of money, and waste of resources. So in order to help you to make the most out of your learning outcomes assessment data for better decision making, we are offering you this global business education assessment tool. We call it GBE exam. So what is GBE, right? Simply put, it is a customizable program level assessment solution with in-depth reporting and data analysis to help satisfy assurance of learning requirements. So GBE itself provides you with a normed summative assessment for academic programs, and you can use it for internal and external programmatic evaluation. I mentioned this is customizable, so you can really measure learning outcomes that are relevant to you. If there are certain areas that your program does not cover, right? Especially being an MBA or a master's level program, you're not going to hit all, 13 to 18 specialization or topical areas in management education. So with this tool, you'll be able to really customize an assessment to measure your learning outcomes and measure student retained knowledge associated with those programmatic learning outcomes. So it is, again, designed to address program level accreditation requirements. It's not course level, it's not module level, though of course you can use this tool, it's available to you, but the challenge is to really look at your program as a whole, right? To have an assessment that gives you that overall results and picture. So that's what we have designed it for. And you can administer it as an outbound or and an inbound. So outbound is what we call the post test, right? An assessment that's offered to your learners at the end of the academic program, entire program, or you can use it as a pre and post. So with the pre-test being inbound exam or freshman or sophomore, or in your case, your MBA students, master's level students entering the program, they would take the inbound exam. So that would be your benchmarking, right? And you can compare the inbound, outbound results to get the direct measure of learning. So because it's a GBE assessment exam, we offer it in 7 different languages so that, we're not assessing students' knowledge of English. We're really trying to get to that students' retained knowledge of business education that they have received from your program, right? So these are the languages available to you. The core GB exam is available in British English, and we have databases of GBE available in German, Spanish, French, Portuguese, Mongolian, and Russian. I know our company is a US-based organization, but GB is a truly global business assessment education. It's business exam for schools that are located outside of the US. So topic-wise, the questions are not US-centric, examples are not US-centric, so you don't worry if you are concerned that it could be quite biased towards US examples or topics. It's not. So here are some of the key features. You can build either multiple or single assessment exams that align to your learning outcomes by selecting from the list of 12 core business and management topics. And you can also add custom topics. I'll show you those topics shortly. So in doing so, you can choose from 2 distinct test banks. So we have a separate postgraduate test bank for your master's or MBA students. And for schools that have undergraduate programs, we have a separate undergraduate test bank. And then once you sign up to use our assessment service, you will get 24/7 unlimited and full administrator access to all your students' results and data, right? And you will have an ability to log in and manage the data and results, except for the scores, of course, and an ability to generate all the analytical reports that we make available to you. And I'll go through what's available to you briefly. And then with your student performance data, you will be able to conduct internal and external analysis of your program. So, and benchmark your scores with other institutions based on the demographical characteristics of the institutions. So if you wanted to compare your students' results against average of all international master's programs, you have an ability to do so. If you wanted to compare to Asia Pacific schools averages only, or Indian, we have a really healthy Indian average, or European or regional, you also have an ability to do so too, just to see where your students performing relative to these different averages. You can also compare to all US business MBA programs, and then there are many ways to cut and slice our US data. And then we have extensive security measures to enable online testing with or without a proctor. And in case without a proctor, that saves you, of course, good anywhere from $40 to $150, depending on what kind of service you are using. So this is the list of the 12 business topics that we offer you. So when we say business topics, these are the umbrella terms of what you might call subjects or overall content areas. So I saw there was a question. Okay, no open questions. Okay, good. I guess it got answered. So in addition to this, so you can, depending on what is covered in your particular program, you may select 10 out of these topics to include in an assessment exam. But if you have multiple master's program with different specializations, maybe you have one that's more heavily focused on math, accounting, and statistics, or maybe you have another program that's more focused on management and marketing. So you can have multiple exams with multiple variations of these business topics incorporated into the assessment. We have an ability to upload customized topics. So Kayla and I, we were talking the other day how she has a Fashion Institute of Design and Technology in her background. And one of our partner institutions is Fashion Institute of Technology out of New York. And so they had to have fashion merchandising. And we don't have that topic. And we have I don't think we have any other schools that offer that topic, but it's essential, right? Being a Fashion Institute of Technology, offering master's degree for management, they needed to have it, so we can upload that as one of the custom topics. All right, so I mentioned we offer expansive reporting capability, and that's essentially why you want to use our tools, so that you get all the data and all the results turned into really great user-friendly analytics and metrics that you can take and understand your data and results and use it for your decision making. So, we've been talking, it's not enough to administer the assessment alone, right? The most beneficial part of assessment is to use the data and the results to gain insight into how your students are learning, how your curriculum is delivering this knowledge to your students. You want to identify the areas of strength and improvement, or if you're doing, great, keep doing it. But if there are areas of improvement, you want to tackle it. And you want to use this for your decision making. So once you identify the gaps, you can start discussing the way to bridge that gap and come up with remediation steps. So these actionable results are produced by our assessment tool. And of course, it helps you to satisfy your accreditation requirements, could be national, international, or programmatic. And then, so not only it helps you to improve the quality of your program, but you're able to meet your accreditors requirements as far as assurance of learning needs are concerned. And so you are hitting multiple goals with one tool. So I wanted to I want to offer you one more poll. And this time, if you could answer, let me know to what degree are you able to close the loop using your learning outcomes data, right? So first is, yes, very successfully, you're doing great. Most often you will probably fall in the partially, you're doing some things great, and maybe there's some areas you could improve. And then you may not have a formal process, or you may not have, and we do have a 10% of you who don't have an assessment process and plan yet. So I expect around that time to sort of see that answering, you don't have it in place, closing the loop process. And thank you for responding. And I wanted to get a good, oh, that's a good percentage. All right. Let me share the results. As was expected, you have some, good partial implementation of closing the loop processes using learning outcomes data, which is 80%, which is excellent. And then kind of as was expected, another 10%, you may not have a formal process. And then another 10%, you don't have a process in place because you are putting an assessment process together. So thank you for that. And then let's get into what kind of reports we offer you, right? That's the bread and butter of why you would use an assessment tool that Peregrine offers. All right, so there's a question. So here's a question, kind of piggybacking on the previous question. So generally, students' feedback on the faculty members is treated confidentially. So it's challenging to use them as an indirect measure. So your views, please. So I'm assuming a faculty are giving feedback to students, and here, as far as accreditation is concerned, we are not talking about individual students' evaluation, right? we're not even talking about individual course level evaluation. We're looking at an overall programmatic evaluation of your learning outcomes, right? So for example, if one of your learning outcomes was your students need to learn to communicate professionally and effectively, just for example. And then indirect measure results came from responses of faculty on how they perceive their students' performance relative to this communicating effectively and efficiently. And then you are going to gather the data and then average them, right? So this year, you can say X percentage of students, performed. You have to have some really detailed, some good rubrics. So 60% of the students performed at level 5 or higher on communicating effectively and efficiently. So that's the kind of result and evaluation you're looking when you're looking at a program level assessment. And yes, with our assessment also, you do get as an institution access to all your individual students' results, right? But when you report the results to your accreditor, also when you use the results for your decision-making evaluation purposes, you are looking at averages, right, of your students' performance on, say, management or organizational behavior and so forth. So you will get individual student results, but also for programmatic evaluation purposes, you're looking at an average of the entire program performance. Does that answer your question? Okay, there's another question. Curriculum delivery by the faculty as an indirect measure. But these is okay. So what I'm offering you is assessment of business knowledge areas, right? So our students, so we're measuring students' retained knowledge. If you wanted to, we have a critical thinking assessment tool, which is a separate assessment, which is kind of similar to, folded, scaffolded questions. If a student answers this, we offer another question. So this is a scenario. Students have to think through, come up with a solution, so forth. One thing. Another area of decision-making skills, right? So that's kind of cutting into workplace readiness skills, soft skills competency. That is covered under evalu skills. So I would be happy to sit down with you and go over your learning outcomes and see which assessment tool to use for which of your learning outcomes. I hope that answers your question. All right, I just want to make sure if there are any other questions. Okay, great. Thank you. All right. So yeah, definitely please keep your questions coming in, and I will try to check and answer them as they come in, and also provide you with what kind of data you receive from Peregrine's. This particular assessment tool is for measuring students' retained knowledge and business education topics. All right. So we have the reports grouped into 3 categories. One is individual student results-based reports. The other one is programmatic evaluation. The third is for, we call it supplemental, but that'll help you to identify gaps in knowledge and so forth. So the first is, if you wanted to look at individual student results, you have access to all your data, all your student results. If a student has taken inbound, outbound exam, you'll be able to have that individual student progress report, which we call pairwise report, right? The next is for your programmatic evaluation purposes. So if you wanted to take a look at, trend analysis, you will run the longitudinal analysis report. You can include 4 exam periods into one report, and essentially you define what a period is. You can look at your students' results by quarter if that's the assessment you've conducted. If you have, annual, or if you wanted to combine multiple years and have, every 5 years, assuming, you've been with us for that long, you can also do that. But the report you really want to go into and sit down and take a really close look is the internal analysis report. And that report breaks down the results into finer grain of topic subject level areas. So for example, if you have management is broken down to human resource management, organizational behavior, and operations, right? And then even within operations, it'll be broken down into 4 to 6 subject areas, is what we call in the US, but into a finer detailed level of what makes up operations management. So this will help you to really zoom in and see where you're doing well, where you could improve, and why you see overall category result maybe say 60%, but then if you go and drill down, maybe you did really well in HR management because that's your strength, and maybe your students really did not well on organizational behavior, but that's because by choice you decided to not focus your program on organizational behavior. So that's a really good report. And then there's executive summaries. And then I mentioned briefly the external comparison report. So you can compare your students' results against benchmark, international average, all European, all Asian, all US MBA programs, and so forth. If you have multiple programs with specializations, you can use the program comparison report. So your accounting students, are they performing at a higher level on accounting topics than your marketing students, right? And then you can have multiple student cohorts, could be campus-based, could be adult learners, traditional learners. Nowadays, you might have online students versus hybrid students versus in-person students. So you can compare those results. All right, any questions? So with the supplemental reports, the response distractors is what I would probably want to come back. You were asking about the indirect measure of learning, right? So with our assessment, you can offer a student survey free of charge to your graduating students. And then in this student survey, you can put indirect measure related questions to your students. So with one tool, you can get direct measure and indirect measure. So that's a pretty nice tool. Or you can have student satisfaction survey or faculty feedback survey. It's up to you how you would want to utilize this. So, and we provide the summary of those results. It could be also open-ended questions, Likert scale. It's a pretty flexible tool there. All right. So if you wanted to, of course, look at all the different aggregate averages by different categories, you can pull out the aggregate extraction report. But if you wanted to see which schools make up each of the different aggregates, you can run the client schools and aggregates report. All right. So this is the internal analysis, collecting data. So there's a lot of stuff we can talk about, closing the loop, how to use the results, how to compare the results, and multiple ways to cut and slice your data and compare and internally and externally. And the one report I wanted to conclude this with is the response distractor report. Essentially, this tells you why your students answering questions incorrectly. This helps you to identify the knowledge gaps in your students, but also why they answered questions incorrectly. So the students, assuming even if they picked a wrong answer, they went through some good thinking and logical reasoning, right? So if they selected it, there's a reason behind it. So we have coded each incorrect response to one of the 5 types of response distractors. So are the students answering questions incorrectly due to calculation-based error, concept-based error, fact-based error, or interpretation-based error? So depending on that, using this data will help you to indicate what kind of remediation steps you might want to take in order to improve the results, right? So if calculation-based error is, the highest percentage for your accounting students, for example, maybe your accounting MBA students need a refresher course, math for accounting students, right? And if there's a concept-based error is a predominant reason why your students not scoring as high as you want them to do, then maybe you need to add some more group assignments, activities where students get to use their critical thinking, hone in the concepts, discuss and understand at a deeper level the concepts that are being taught, and so forth. So here's a question. Let me check my understanding. We can outsource AOL process to Peregrine. Will AACSB accept this kind of arrangement? So you are going to have, you're not going to have just one assessment or one way to measure your learning outcomes, right? So one of the tools you use is absolutely could be Peregrines. And we have many AACSB schools that use our assessment for measuring learning outcomes directly. So will ACSP accept this? Yes. You can outsource all AOL process to Peregrine, not all AOL process. The assessment of student learning outcomes, in this case, related to business knowledge areas, we can absolutely cover that. And so I hope that answers your question. And the next one is, teaching is done by us, but assessment is done by a third party. But generally, a teacher is supposed to teach, assess, and close the loop, right? So here's the part where, remember the Deming cycle, we talked about share and analyze and then make change. So teaching is done by the faculty for sure, right? They teach, they assess for course level. And then, but what you're doing is, in order to improve the quality of your program overall, also in order to meet programmatic accreditors requirements, you're evaluating your program as a whole, right? So a teacher may know his or her area of what they're teaching and assessing, but as a program, so you say you have an MBA program with accounting focus, you have multiple teachers teaching accounting, but overall, where are your students performing, right? Where are their strengths? Where are their gaps? And this may be tied to one teacher, or this may be tied to your textbook. This may be tied to the way you are teaching, your delivery method, your teaching method. So with our kind of evaluation, it expands this course level, module level, or individual teacher level assessment and brings it out to a force level, right? To a higher level evaluation, and helps you see the bigger picture and identify the trends, identify the holes, identify the strengths, which is great, keep doing. So that's the difference. I hope this answers your question. I know, yeah, usually this is a, sometimes 2-day workshop, AOL workshop. Sometimes it's, at least a day and a half, at least, a full day. And rarely we've had half a day workshops. So I'm kind of condensing a lot of content into one, and thank you for recognizing that, because the comment was, thank you for the seminar. I understand the challenge of discussing AOL in 1 hour. So I'd be happy to expand it, make it wider, and offer it to your team or to your faculty or administrators, and that would be great if you needed that. And the AOL work will be a very helpful tool too. All right, so how are we doing on time? So in summary, we're getting to it, and I really appreciate your questions, and this is the way I like it, interactive. So in summary, with the GBE assessment tool is able to provide you with a meaningful, cost-effective, and practical solution to the evaluation of programmatic learning outcomes as they relate to business knowledge content areas. In this particular example, as I mentioned, we have the critical thinking assessment tool that's separate. If we also have value skills, which is the soft skills assessment tool, and we have talked about it. I'd be happy to talk to you individually or as a team about it. So you can cover multiple areas with Peregrine solutions, not just this one. And then with this particular tool, you are able to compare your program's results, not only internally, but also externally to various aggregate pools. And then you are here measuring students' retained knowledge directly. I do want to, it's a multiple choice. It's an online assessment tool that is offered to you as a pre and post, or you can just use it as an outbound assessment tool. It's very flexible. And then you are able to cover accreditation requirements along with using the data and results for your continuous improvement purposes. All right, so I know there's a question, but as you're asking the question, I wanted to run the fourth poll. And here, Kayla and I, we wanted to hear from you and learn what topics you might be interested for our future webinar offerings. I'm thrilled and excited, and it's been a pleasure to work with AAPBS and Kayla specifically to offer these summer webinar series. We hope to continue it in the fall semester. And then, so the answers are, oh, interesting. So what you're seeing is a little different from my slide, but what you're seeing is experiential learning simulations, experiential learning, engaging learners in designing innovative content, developing soft skills and digital skills, and assessing, I should add, and then assurance of learning, more on assessment. And I'll make sure I update the slide to reflect the poll questions, and I'd be happy to share my slides with you. So far the responses are coming in: assurance of learning, 45%. And we have, let me share the results. Thank you for responding to this poll question. So we have 45% of you wanting to learn more about assurance of learning and assessment. Thank you. We can discuss more. We can offer going depth and maybe offer a longer version of this, maybe, Kayla. And then developing soft skills and digital skills. All right, so you see the results. Thank you for responding to it. And then let's see, there's some more questions. I know we are a little over time. So thank you. If you have any questions, I know Kayla has shared our email addresses, and we'd be more than happy to work with your team, with your faculty, with your administrators, or just communicate through email and answer and provide you with additional resources. Thank you.
Thank you everyone for our APPS summer webinar series with Peregrine Global Services. And Aliman and I will discuss further with the poll results, and we'll come back with better and more seminars in the fall.
Thank you very much, everyone.